we're super grateful to be here and sharing with you all and appreciate you making the time to join Deb and I. Sometimes I feel like it's lonely understanding pain in the way we do because it's clear that despite decades of research and amazing clinical outcomes, the mainstream narrative is still quite antiquated, and a lot of people and a lot of clinicians haven't heard about these ideas, some of the things we're going to share with you today. So what we realize more and more is that when people have symptoms, it's kind of the responsibility really falls on you, on the consumer, to try to go down a new road when things that you've tried aren't working the way that you'd hoped. Feel free to jump in, Deb. And
Mm-hmm. I think one of the amazing things for me that's been about learning about primary pain is just how much I have the ability to affect the experiences in my body. And one of the things that really helped me kind of reinforce this idea is both creating like these kind of new learning experiences in my body, but also connecting with other people. And so that's, I think, what's so powerful about working with a coach and then kind of becoming a coach is like seeing this experience, people's embodied experiences around pain change every single day.
Mhm.
And then sometimes I realize like not everybody is having this experience. Like people in pain don't know, what we've been discovering, but I'm excited that we're getting this chance to learn it because every single day I watch people change their experience of pain. So that teaches me that primary pain is a real thing, is the real experience of the body. It's not just something that we made up.
Yeah, sometimes it feels like a secret, and I've had people get mad at me like, Charlie, you have this secret. You need to be sharing it with people. I'm like, okay, well, here we are. That's what today's about.
Exactly.
Let's get into it. Should we move to the next slide? Cool. So, every day I'm talking about this stuff every day, and I'm just constantly struck about the messages people hear from their friends, from their family members, and from other providers. And what these messages have in common is this theme of fear. And the challenge is they're quite compelling and sticky, even though they're often wrong. So personally, I dream of a day when everyone just knows these 7 things as though they were a fact. Kind of like people attribute right now, they attribute pain often to getting old. That's like a knee-jerk reaction. It's convenient, even though it's wrong. And so we're hoping that these 7 starting point ideas really start to become sticky like that.
Yeah. I think for me, one of the things is to move us out of doubt and confusion into this sense of surety that when we understand how pain is created, which is the perfect slide, that pain 100% of the time is made by the brain, that then we can kind of put the map together for ourselves.
Yeah. So Hunter, I think we're going to start with number 2. I'm going to go out of order and like improv here a little bit because this is such an important and big idea that pain is 100% of the time without exception determined by the brain. Whether you broke a leg or burned your hand or whether you have no body injury at all, the brain is responsible for creating that pain. So really it's your brain deciding that you're in danger that results in this output of pain. So we know that pain is not a product of tissue damage or injury. MRI findings don't predict it well. Age, arthritis, overuse, and biomechanics, these are things that we used to think were important, but they often don't correlate. We'll talk about this later because I'm a physical therapist by training, so they can play a role and sometimes need to be considered. But what pain correlates more with is our belief and our expectations. And the brain's job is to do what we call predictive coding. And based on these beliefs and expectations, the brain is always trying to keep you safe. It's always working to try to predict what's going to happen next to keep you safe. And pain just happens to be a great output. A couple stories that Deb and I talk about all the time. One is the construction worker in the UK that jumped off a scaffolding and landed on a nail that went through his boot. He had severe pain, was taken by ambulance to the hospital, given medicine, in agony. But yet, when they cut off the boot, when he got to the hospital, the nail had gone right between his toes, didn't injure his foot at all. But his pain is just as real as someone who had an injury from that nail going through the foot. There's a similar construction worker story about a guy who drove a nail through his fingers, actually, so that his fingers were like stuck together with this nail. But this construction worker was on his own at this job site and really had no one to help him. There was no way he could get an ambulance, so he had to drive himself to the hospital. And even though he had real tissue damage in his hand from that nail, he had no pain until he got to the hospital and had that nail removed. So his brain made a decision that he wasn't safe yet, and so it delayed the onset of pain until he was safe. Go ahead and jump in, Deb.
Oh, I was going to say, I've even heard another story about construction workers. There's a lot of construction workers and pain stories of a construction worker that shot a nail through his hand, and he was hanging out with his buddies and laughing about it because apparently, I guess that's a common thing. Like they just thought it was hilarious. So that even that relationship, the brain decided in that moment that he wasn't in danger. It was almost like a party trick, right? And so there is tissue damage, but there was not danger. So the assessment from the brain was that you don't need pain because we're not concerned about this.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of a fascinating situation. So this is the starting point for the rest of this talk is the brain is in charge of all of your pain regardless of what's causing it. We can go to the next slide, I guess, which is the one before it. Actual slide number 1. And I see this as a physical therapist all the time because people are coming in thinking that they're injured. They're coming into my practice. But I see over and over again that pain can and often does start without any injury to the body. And the majority of the clients that show up in my clinic say they don't know why the pain started. Nothing happened. There wasn't a car crash. There wasn't a fall. There wasn't a moment of injury. There wasn't a pop. The pain just sort of started out of nowhere. And I have a recent client who had butt pain, for instance, that just started one day when she was sitting at work. And she tried to blame her age and cycling and yoga and the yard work she was doing and her mattress. But really more likely what was going on was something at work in that moment, something that was, playing into her brain and reinforcing fear. And so she had pain. And so in this case, pain is really a danger alarm message from the brain that in her case was related directly to fear, in this case about her work, about her job, and about her boss. And of course, the body sends information to the brain all the time, and that mixes with all the other danger signals that the brain is processing from the environment, and our psychology, and our social realities. So unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, we'll see how you all feel at the end of this, pain just happens to be a common and handy way for the brain to get our attention when life feels dangerous, and often when nothing happens with the body. I've thrown out this stat, but even in my busy practice in Boulder, Colorado, where I see a lot of athletes, 8 to 9 out of 10 of my clients that come into my clinic have no injury when their pain started. There was nothing that happened to their body. Their pain just started out of nowhere, which I think is kind of shocking.
I always find it's interesting when people talk about an injury, they tell me about an injury, but the injury they're talking about happened a decade ago or 8 years ago, like a very long time ago, in which if we took this pain piece out, we would have assumed that that the tissues in the body have healed. What hasn't healed is the message of pain, is the danger signal hasn't healed, but the body is healed. So can we even call that an injury anymore? But it's like kind of like how we think about it.
That's such a good point, Deb, because even though a lot of people in my practice, their pain just started yesterday or this week, even though those people aren't usually injured and their brain is doing this, one of the things we look at, that Deb and I look at clinically, is when people have been in pain for more than 6 months, we can trust that the body is healed at that point. And so we know that most of the time, pain that sticks around longer than, say, 3 to 6 months is no longer due to a body injury, with very few exceptions. Does that capture what you were saying, Deb?
Yeah, I think it's helpful to like loosen the idea of what an injury is. It's
Mhm.
like, yes, when people come into your clinic, like, and they have a pain complaint, it's like, did something just happen? Is there a reason why? Like, did you fall down? Right? That would be an injury, right? Sometimes what I hear people talk about when they, it's just like they talk about an injury, but they're talking about the past. And so, yeah, I find it's really helpful to separate them.
Yeah, yeah, it's fascinating. And I talk about this all the time in the clinic. There's this, people talk about the difference between acute pain and chronic pain. And really, what that means is, when did the pain start? People think that acute pain sort of presupposes some mechanism, that there's some tissue damage because it just started, and that's not how it works. So I think of acute pain as a time domain, a time marker, not a mechanism.
Mm.
And so while we end up talking about this a lot with people in chronic pain, it's important to know that my client sitting at her desk that had butt pain come on out of nowhere also has very real pain that's not due to an injury, that's due to some other psychosocial stressor. I think we can jump to the next slide, Hunter. Thank you. One of the things we say, Deb and I say over and over again, around this idea of fear, the fact that fear and our experience of pain are correlated, is that all pain is real. So we like to start there. Like, there's no difference between pain that's from an injury and pain that's been there for 10 years that's now being exclusively driven by the brain. It's the same pain. And my clients will say, well, Charlie, it just feels so, like, it feels so real. But there, the problem is there's no difference. So we like to reinforce that all pain is real, and most pain, especially the kind we don't choose, feels scary and dangerous because it threatens everything we know and love, right? It's designed to get our attention. The challenge is that when we react by, these are a lot of F's, freaking out, focusing on, getting frustrated by, trying to fix, and fearing, we often get more pain, which is kind of paradoxical. My client yesterday had this list of thoughts and feelings that we made and behaviors due to her back pain. And this list was like, I'm getting old, my body's weak and it's asymmetrical. I can't run these long distances that I'm running. I'm going to wear myself out. I have this label of piriformis syndrome, and my PT said X, Y, and Z was wrong with me. She talked about shoes, and there were all these fears about how COVID had affected her business. So all of these thoughts and feelings and behaviors are going to create either a feeling of safety or danger. And if the balance tips in the direction of danger, then pain is going to be more likely, and it's going to be more likely to stick around.
Yeah. One of the things I like to explore around pain is it's very useful to just say, like, yes, your pain is real. And then now what? What is even the experience of this pain creating in your life? What are you making this pain mean? That I can't do my job, that I, can't do the activities that I enjoy, right? So there's oftentimes a lot of fear-based meaning just around the experience of having, what is a normal human experience of having an unpleasant physical sensation. And so when we look at, like, when we ask these questions, they're very, very useful in terms of, like, kind of letting us know why the brain thinks that these unpleasant human sensations are dangerous, because we have so much meaning about the possibility of our life imbued into that experience.
It's a great point, Deb. My client, right before I got on this webinar, she actually said that I'm doomed. She really had this deep feeling like she was doomed because of her mom and this pattern of arthritis in her family. And her mom had just had a hip replacement surgery, and that was her narrative. That's her belief. I'm doomed. She's an athletic person, strong, healthy, and I have the pleasure of being able to evaluate people and tell them that they're not doomed, and tell them that they're okay, and help them start to shift that belief towards safety.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is really fun. And I know you, Deb, you do the same.
Well, we have to kind of bring up all of the fear thoughts so we can look at them and start to think, are they really true? When do you move without pain, right? Well, then we have a lot of evidence of no pain, right? And we want to kind of poke holes in the fear because our brains can think any thoughts, right? So literally, it's like we can run a scary movie in our mind all the time about what we're feeling, but it doesn't mean that the movie is real. But it all kind of works in there together. So sometimes I talk about it like if you're watching an episode of Friends, but you're hearing the Jaws soundtrack, it's going to feel threatening and scary. It's not going to be funny at all. And that's sometimes what's happening inside of our body.
You have the best metaphors, Deb. I think we lost our slide deck
We did.
in the Zoom. Thank you, Hunter.
Thank you.
If we can go to number 4, that's great. So one interesting fact about pain, and really we're talking about pain, but really there are a lot of symptoms that are this way. But pain can be learned, just like any skill. And this is what the brain is really good at, right? You can learn to talk and walk and ride a bike and type and juggle and play sports. And so the brain can learn all these fun and really helpful things, but it's also prone to learning things that are not so helpful. And pain just happens to be one of them. And this especially happens when life feels consistently dangerous. And one of the things I like to remember is that the brain has the best of intentions when it does this. So there's this sometimes talk about like the brain is, now it's my brain that's broken, now it's my brain that's damaged or injured. But what the brain is doing is exactly what it's designed to do. And that's to protect you from danger. And we want to honor that and respect that. So I really work hard to make connections and meaning from pain and other symptoms. And I find that really helps as a way to show the brain that it's no longer a helpful skill and that it can stop. You have any thoughts on that, Deb?
I think it's when we think of our brain or our body as an adversary, then it's going to be very hard to get curious. And part of rewiring the pain experience is curiosity, like using the tool somatic tracking. So I always like to remind myself that my brain and my brain's job is to keep me alive, and whatever it has learned, it thinks it's helpful, right? It's trying to help me. And so it can just start from that basic biological truth and then think, well, what is it that I'm practicing? I like to think of, what am I practicing? Am I practicing fear around this movement, or am I practicing safety? And sometimes just asking myself that question, because sometimes when we get into healing, it can feel very high stakes and super stressful. So what we're actually practicing is stress and not relaxation and not safety. So thinking of it as learned is one of the most useful tools for me, because I know that in the course of my life, I've learned lots of things. I'm still learning, and I can, instead of even trying to unlearn something, it's like we're just trying to learn something new, trying to learn no pain or less danger rather than unlearning.
I think it's one of the most hopeful things about this conversation that we're having, right, about this talk, is that even though people might have been in pain for a decade, 10 years, or 20 years, it's never too late to unlearn these things. The nervous system is changing all the time. And so, yeah, it can be unlearned. It's probably a good time to go to slide number 5, or point number 5. And that is that you all can unlearn pain. And how do we do that? Well, we're here with Lynn Health, and this platform was designed to support people in doing exactly that. And we have an amazing team, Deb being one of the people on that amazing team, who supports people every day in unlearning it. And so sometimes I like to outline the steps for people just in a really basic way so that they understand what the menu is. And I always start with this idea that the shift in belief is so important, and understanding how pain works is so important as a starting point to help reduce fear. That's usually step 1. Step 2 is, once you can support people in feeling safe, then you can get them back moving again and being in their body again, in a new way, maybe a way they haven't done in a really long time. And as a physical therapist, I love that part of the process, green lighting people to move again. The next step would be sort of the somatic step, where we're starting to support people in getting curious about their symptoms and reconceptualizing what they mean, starting to relate to them in a new way, which is some of what Deb was sharing. We've talked about that a little bit. And then the fourth step, if I'm going to lay this out in 4 quadrants, is this emotional processing step. And it's important to know that being able to attend to feelings, our emotions, is very similar to us being able to attend to the physical sensations without judgment, without trying to change it, without trying to make it go away. Just allow it to be there. It's all welcome. And then be able to sort of put it out on the table so that we have something to work with. And so those are the steps. I wonder, Deb, if you want to jump in and talk more about that from a coaching perspective, and then Lynn.
I think what's important that we provide at Lynn is the coach holds the larger knowledge, right? Like the whole picture, because most of us have been through this ourselves. I had a dramatic overnight reduction in pain, that from learning these concepts and applying them to myself. And that was without de-aging. Right? And so as a 50-year-old person, I didn't get younger, and I also didn't lose any weight, but my knee pain dramatically changed overnight. And so I was like, that was knowledge that kind of updated my understanding of what was happening in my body. And so in working with people, helping them heal from all kinds of pain and all kinds of chronic conditions, so migraines, back pain, foot pain, it's like I just know that it's possible, and I understand the kind of mind-body mechanism of why it works. And then we have the person that we're working with, and then there is a bit of it's almost like a treasure hunt of finding kind of like what the brain believes, where the entry point is, how do we update these conditioned responses? How do we create corrective experiences? What feels safe? How do we even talk about safety? Some people, want to explore childhood experiences. We want to talk about fear in a different way, but each person is different. And that's what's so beautiful about having your own coach, is that we can help guide you and lead you on a clearer path through this process, and then kind of be with you and support you in both the learning process, but also that brain updating prediction code, of the prediction code. I always like to say, we're always learning. If we've learned something, we're always either reinforcing it or we're learning something new. And so what the coaching does is helping people even see where they've learned something new. So I'll have members just tell me oh, I went on this walk and that felt great. So then but then they kind of discount it because they're very focused on the part that doesn't feel great. And it's let's go back to this part about the walk. Why did it feel great? What do you want to tell your body about this experience that will help you really believe that you're safe? How can we use that thing that happened? Because it happened in their body. How can we use that to build more belief? And then that's what we do together.
Yeah, I love the way you said that, Deb, that the coach's job is to sort of hold the larger view and to be able to sort of scaffold or support members in being able to navigate the process in the right way, rather than focus on the outcome. I think that's great. It made me think of this client I just saw yesterday, and she had a chronic back pain for years after the spinal fusion that had an infection, and she had to have it revised, and the fear just got worse and worse and worse to the point where she was almost disabled. And she was seeing a physical therapist, and it was just getting worse despite the best efforts to fix the body, right? And in the course of a couple of years, we worked hard on reducing fear. We processed some of her big feelings about, as you said, stuff that happened when she was younger, stuff that was going on in her life in the present moment. But mostly what she found a lot of value in was getting back in her body again over time, and really her seeing, her showing to herself that she was safe. And now she can travel, she can drive a car, she can lift things, play, climb, and she trusts that her body's strong. And I always want to reinforce, like, can be a really important part of the process, is not to make this just about the brain. We'll talk about that in a minute, but also that the body is important, you know. And it's fun. I just actually saw her in the park yesterday, and we threw the frisbee for a little bit, which is something we've done over time. We've used play to get her to be back in her body again. And she's, in 2 years, she's gone from being disabled to being able to throw the frisbee with me, and she's traveling to receive this prestigious award this weekend for her career, which is something she never could have done 2 years ago. And it just makes me like so emotional to see how far she's come through this process. It's just beautiful.
Yeah, that's an amazing story. Also, I've had a person I was working with who, when we started working together, she had chronic back pain for 20 years, and her goal was to be able to like walk to the post office and do some gardening. And she achieved those goals in the time that we were working together. And she just sent me a message saying, "Oh, by the way, I'm going to be walking the Camino de Santiago, which is 140 miles." And that was not a goal that she even knew that she could ever have or believe in or want. And this was work that she did over time. Like, the more she created the belief and the experience, she updated her brain's, her brain and her body, right? It's multi-directional, right? So it's like the brain has to feel safe so the body can do certain movements, and then the body has to do certain movements and teach the brain that it's safe. So we're having a whole conversation, because we really are one being. There is no separation between the mind and the body. It's just useful to think of it that way.
I'm so glad you pointed that out.
Yeah.
It's such an important point. And that takes us to point number 6, which is that movement and exercise is less about what people think it's about. It's not about building strength and being more flexible. It's about proving to the brain that you're safe. And as a physical therapist, I'm the last person to make this a binary where it's either the brain or the body, right? They go together. The brain has a body and the body has a brain. And I think we risk minimizing the role of the body when we place such a strong emphasis on the brain. Of course, we want to acknowledge there can be changes that happen in the body when the brain is in a state of danger alarm. The way I talk about it as a body-oriented clinician is that when someone's dealing with what we call primary pain, the learned pain phenomena, is that the things we see in the body tend to be a result of the pain rather than the cause. So micromanaging, try to fix all the things that are going on with the body tends to have a fear-inducing effect. It tends to cause more problems. So I talk with people about this all the time, that sometimes we're thinking about it backwards. The pain doesn't go away first, and then we can move. First, we need to move despite some pain and remind ourselves that we're safe. And in the process of moving again, then the brain will start to make a new habit. So really what movement does is provide a novel and safe input to the brain, sort of creating what I think of as like a new map. Like, the brain has a better sense of where the body is in space and what it looks like. People say it's like getting in your body again. And the brain then has this real clarity, as opposed to it being blurry and out of focus. The brain then has a clarity. And so we spend a lot of time supporting people and trying to move with joy and adding novelty and curiosity and playfulness, like throwing the frisbee with my client, and getting in nature. And these can be really powerful ways to show the brain that it's safe, shift belief. And the body is really kind of a sneaky back doorway to get into the brain, to get it to change. So this is all part of unlearning again. Deb, I know you have a lot of experience with this.
I mean, I do. I have a lot of experience in my own body. I do a number of fun things when I am experiencing. Sometimes pain will just pop up in my body as I'm moving, and I'm recognizing that that's my nervous system just kind of checking in, and kind of, because it's just having a moment of insecurity, and it's just kind of saying like, oh, I don't know if we're safe, right? It's almost asking me the question by giving me this pain signal. It's kind of saying, right, because the brain's job is to keep us safe. And one way it communicates with us is through pain. So it will give us pain to get us to do something different, right? So it's like, yeah, if you have your hand on a hot stove, you're going to feel pain, so that's a signal to move your hand away. It doesn't wait until all your skin has been damaged, right? So the pain sometimes is this kind of like request or signal from the body to do something, or from the brain to do something different with your body. And then part of my job is to assess, am I in danger? When I'm just taking a casual walk down the street, sometimes it's just a message from my body to change my pace, to go slower, to notice the world around me, to remind it that like walking is safe, that there's nothing, that there is no danger. And that's my opportunity to create this kind of update. And I'll do that either through somatic tracking. Sometimes I like to just sing along with my steps and just be like, no, we're here, we're having fun. Like, I know that you think this, maybe this walk is a drag, but I'm actually really enjoying it. Kind of getting back into my body, into a place of enjoyment. But just recognizing that pain in that moment doesn't mean, oh no, my knee doesn't work or there's something wrong. It's just my brain kind of checking in to my body, being like, how we doing? Except it doesn't actually, I wish it could just say, how we doing, instead of it is like stabbing me in the knees sometimes.
I love this point, Deb, that you're making, that like we expect some amount of pain as people start to move again. And so like unlearning pain is really results from relearning what the body's all about. But people have to accept that there's going to be some amount of discomfort, some amount of sensitivity, and that's okay. And those safety messages as you're navigating that process of relearning what the body's all about, it's really helpful. Should we go to the last point? Man, that was a rapid fire race through these 7 points. This is probably our favorite, that self-care and self-love is a cure for pain. And I think that movement is a form of self-care and self-love, but these come in many forms, and we're jumping right now sort of to the end of the process, which is where we like to try to get people towards the end. But one of the goals of this whole process is life change that comes from learning about the factors that were driving danger in your brain and nervous system to begin with. So really taking a look at your life, starting to see what those things are, and then reassuring yourself, tuning into your own needs, setting boundaries, creating meaningful life change. And sometimes coming out of COVID, for instance, like fostering relationships and moving through this phase of loneliness that a lot of us have been in. And these are just a few of the things that result in pain going away. And the saying we use is that we cure pain as a byproduct of creating a more healthy mind-brain ecosystem, or more healthy life. I think that's a sort of an important takeaway here, is that if we focus too much on curing the pain, it tends to stay scary and dangerous and stick around. If we focus on the process of creating a more healthy life through things like self-care and self-love, that is an incredible way to reduce fear and thus to reduce pain. Jump in there, Deb.
Yeah. I have a number of members who, when this pain came on for them, sometimes it is around their thoughts about aging, or, comparison about like, well, I used to be able to do these activities and now I can't. And really hearing this kind of struggle with self-love and self-care when they've kind of often had a lot of their self-regard come through achievement. And so when there's like a disconnect between what you used to be able to do and what you can do now, if that's very painful emotionally, or you don't have, or because it's creating a lot of fear about like, well, what does the future hold when I can't do, anything, right? There's sometimes some catastrophizing that's happening. It becomes some health anxiety and catastrophizing. Sometimes that's because we've watched other people in our lives suffer and struggle with health declines or things like that. So people are often thinking about the future in a fearful way. And so some of what this is about teaching is like how to have positive self-regard with your body in this moment. So practicing self-care and self-love on the path of healing is also like that becomes the learning. What we're learning now is also, again, it's back to feeling safe having any physical experience. So the safety process is kind of then what updates the brain to be like, oh, okay, then this weird sensation that just kind of came on actually isn't dangerous because I don't feel like now my whole life is going to fall apart, right? So there's always thinking about what are we making this pain mean in our life, and then how do we decide that we're safe and we're okay. And maybe sometimes that means like there are changes that have to happen in our life to support that feeling of safety. And then how do we do that?
It's wonderful. I think, we all know, I notice in myself and with my clients that we have this tendency to speak to others with great care and great love. And yet the way we talk to ourselves doesn't tend to, to match that necessarily. And one of the strategies I use in the clinic is to sit down with people and try to make a self-care list, or ask people like, what do you do now to take care of yourself? What do you do to be kind to yourself? And sometimes that list is hard to make for people. It's one or two or three things. And I like to expand that list. It's a really fun part of the process to brainstorm and vision and get creative with like, what could we do? What could we add back in for you to take care of yourself? And so the goal really can't be to reduce pain, but expand the person.
Yeah. My member today, I was just talking to her. What she noticed was how hard she is on herself. And this is her own self-reflection. And I was like, that's amazing awareness. The best part of this experience is now you have this awareness that you've been talking very meanly to yourself. And I was like, so that's where how would you like to go forward in terms of treating yourself with care and compassion? That's something that we can practice. How would you say, how would you talk to a friend or somebody else that you loved, right? And how do you then practice that for yourself? But it was only through this experience of noticing what her internal narrative was that she was able to have this self-awareness. And I just think that was great.
Excellent. Well said, Deb. Yeah, I think we're sort of, we always run the risk of making this sound simple, and sometimes it feels simple, but I can tell you it's anything but easy. And having someone on your side, having some support, people around you that care about you is such an important part of this process. And one of the things we're trying to do in creating this platform, is to make that accessible and affordable for as many people as we can. So I guess we're so grateful you joined us, and this is probably a good point to transition into some of your questions, and we'd love to hear from you. What questions do you have? I know there's been some conversation going on in the chat, some of our other team members. Give everyone a second to put their questions in. I'll start in here, Deb. So the first question is, can you stay on painkillers to do these steps in order to provide safety to the brain? And the answer is absolutely yes. This is not you have to choose one or the other. We can rely on biomedical interventions like medicine to support people as they start this process. Of course, eventually the goal would be to have people feeling well enough that they can get off painkillers and the side effects that they have. But sure, we do this with people all the time.
Okay. I'll do number 2. Okay. Does self-care and self-love cure neuropathy pain, neuropathy caused by diabetes? Is this a blanket concept or are there exceptions? So one of the, it's hard to determine, like when we think about primary pain or secondary pain, what we've noticed is when people are diagnosed with a pain condition, that is a tradition. There's a traditional medicine view of what's happening in the body. And so that diagnosis becomes part of the expectancy of pain. And so part of what we're doing is saying, well, you know what? We're not going to say there's nothing going on with your nerves. But some of what happens is the brain learns pain or becomes sensitized to this kind of nociceptive input that's happening in the body. So like your feet on the ground or whatever it is. So we can affect change by using these techniques and update the brain's prediction. And so it's hard to, like, we've definitely had people with neuropathy change their pain. So it's kind of like whether or not the neuropathy is caused by the diabetes, like that's how it's diagnosed. And I don't know, Charlie.
One of the things we talk about with our medical team a lot is this idea of separating the diagnosis from the symptoms. And so we can acknowledge that diabetes is a real metabolic condition, and that's affected by diet and what we eat. And we want to do the things, and a lot of people have already done those things to try to work on those pieces. And we also can recognize that the physical sensations, the symptoms, can be up or down modulated by some of these other variables, like how much stress we're under in the present, or what's happened to us in the past, or how hard we're being on ourselves for eating a certain way or whatever. So absolutely. And often we don't know if we can promise a cure or a significant reduction until we try it. But because all pain is controlled by the brain, including the symptoms from diabetes, we want to recognize that there's an opportunity to just get curious and see what happens, for sure. The next question, I think, is about your metaphor.
Right, metaphor.
Yeah.
So the suggestions of how to catch it earlier is, so much of this work, we use this tool called somatic tracking, and it is a way to attend to the sensations in the body with curiosity. So it's a practice of mindfulness. And one way that you catch it earlier is literally just to practice the art, the embodied experience of noticing what is happening in your mind and what is happening in your body. So as you practice this noticing experience, then you can be like, oh, I'm doing something fun, but there's this strange, ominous, threatening soundtrack happening, right? That sensation of fear in the body, which then becomes kind of like dysregulating for our nervous system. So the better you get at it, the easier it is to catch it. So that's the part of when the paradox is, we invite you to lean into the discomfort and the uncomfortable physical sensations so that we can start to catch them earlier and start to get curious about them. Getting curious about them is also what kind of slows down the nervous system fear response.
These are really skills, right? I mean, we're teaching people new skills. And so I hear that, like, I don't notice it till afterwards because your brain gets hijacked by this fear response. And so one of the skills we teach is helping people know that, like, you're going to have fear. You're going to have those thoughts for a little while. You're going to have symptoms. And the new behavior is, can you pause? Can you take a few breaths? Can you put your hand to your heart and check in with yourself, which is its own form of self-care? And in doing that, and in pausing and creating space and giving your conscious brain time to catch up, you can make a different decision. But that is a skill, and it's something that you have to practice, for sure, no question. Treasure hunt. So someone commented about this idea of a treasure hunt, and what are we treasure hunting for? I have a couple of thoughts on that, Deb, and then I'd love to hear your thoughts. But really, ultimately, what we're trying to do, whether it's in Lynn or in my own practice as a clinician, is build a case, to collect evidence, to collect little bits of treasure along the way, to build a case for safety. And I'll always say that ruling the body out and looking through the lens of danger first to rule out the medical stuff is a part that you cannot skip. But once you've done that, and you can acknowledge that you're now dealing with primary pain, which is pain that's primarily due to the brain and nervous system, not secondary to some other tissue damage problem, then you can move forward, I guess, towards treasure hunting, towards your new life, right? Towards your vision of like who you want to be and how you want to show up. And that's its own separate treasure hunt, I guess. That's how I think of it. You have something to add, Deb?
Oh, I just think, in Lynn, we have care kits. We have ways for you to do this work. So one of them is like building an evidence sheet. So that's kind of same thing that you just said, which is build the treasure are the clues that lead us, that help us make the map.
Mm-hmm. Cool. I love this next question. This could be like a whole hour conversation. The person says, I hear what you're saying about injury not necessarily causing pain, but surely some chronic pain is a result of some kind of tissue damage. How do you know when it's an injury and when it's not? And this is a really big question, but as I said, it's really important to look through sort of a biomedical lens to rule out scary body stuff as a starting point. We can't skip over that phase. That said, we know things like arthritis, which people historically talk about as wear and tear as a direct correlate to pain, really doesn't correlate with pain very well at all. And so there are times when we're dealing with things that show up on MRI scan or X-ray that are really there, but they're not the primary drivers of symptoms. And I think that's a really important point to leave you all with, is that even though there might be some real changes in the body, which are normal as we get older, they're not correlating directly with pain. So how do you know when it's an injury and when it's not? You have to go through the rule out process, and we do that with Lynn. You're connected with a physician that can do a second or third or 10th opinion, whatever it is, and look over all the stuff you've tried and check all the systems, so to speak. So we rule out the body, and then we do this treasure hunt, evidence gathering of ruling in the brain. And that's sort of a separate part of the process. Thoughts about that, Deb?
I would say the question of ongoing tissue damage, like I do think like the brain will protect us from something it perceives as dangerous. So if you twisted your ankle however ago, but you have a belief around your ankle, that belief about your ankle stability or its its structural integrity, then your brain will always be treating this ankle as if there's some kind of threat. And then your body's going to organize your motor patterns around protecting you from this threat. So some of that, then, if you've been doing that for years, you're going to have certain patterns of movement that then your body has decided these are the more safe patterns of movement. So then when you're trying to then get back into new patterns of movement, the brain is obviously going to think like, oh, I don't know, is this scary? Is this dangerous? Like, I remember this ankle is like not trustworthy. And if I think like my ankle's not trustworthy, your brain is really gonna be sending you some messages. So part of that is fine, right? Getting the rule out, but also testing the trustworthiness, like your relationship to the ankle, and creating belief that it is trustworthy. So that also means starting movement slow and building belief and like building that relationship over time. So we don't go just say, I wanted to learn to, I wanted to run a marathon. I wouldn't just go run a marathon the first day I went out running. There are tissue adaptations. There are all kinds of things, but it doesn't mean I can't learn to become a runner. But we start where we are, and then we bring the mind and the body along with us. So that's why it's just really useful to not just assume that pain means tissue damage. That's what we're trying to, at the very least, open up that idea and be like, but what if it doesn't? What if pain is just, we're going to just start with pain as a signal. It's just trying to tell you something. Let's figure out what that is.
I had a client the other day. The doctor told her that her ankle sprain that happened years ago resulted in her ligaments being 40% less solid, or they're 60% more squishy than they used to be, or whatever. I forget the language she used, but she carried this into her life.
Yeah.
And she's still having pain. And as a physical therapist, I learned this really early in school, that the tissues heal themselves, and it's reliable and it's predictable and it's linear. And somewhere along the way, we stopped trusting that. We stopped trusting that muscle heals within a few weeks. We stopped trusting that tendons have an 8-week healing time, ligaments heal in 12 weeks, and even herniated discs and disc injuries, we see from the research, heal reliably within 6 months. And so there's this real distrust that somehow the body doesn't know what it's doing, or it doesn't have this capacity to heal. We've compared ourselves to cars or machines, and that's just not accurate. We're these amazing living organisms. And so if you have an injury, your body will heal itself unless you do something to prevent that from happening, unless you do something intentionally to stop the healing process from happening. Even then, I would say you probably wouldn't be able to do it. And so it's going to heal it as best it can. And then in most cases, the symptoms that are left are not due to tissue damage. Again, we'll recognize that we see things on MRI all the time, but the research over and over and over again not only talks about how much fear MRI scans create, and thus pain, but how much they're good at finding things that are actually not the important thing. They're good at seeing things that are not the drivers of symptoms. And we see this every day with members in the platform.
I always laugh that if I got an MRI of my spine, at 52, I have an 80% chance of it showing disc degeneration, and I don't have any back pain, right? But if I had back pain and then I went and got an MRI, it would show most likely that I had disc degeneration.
Yeah.
And so then somebody reading that would say, oh, this is why your back hurts.
Mm-hmm.
And then we just fall down that rabbit hole, and that makes sense. And then we hear these messages over time, not just from our own doctors, but from people in our lives, family members. We hear this all over the place through the internet. So
nice. I want to talk about this next question because we're almost out of time here.
yeah.
It's funny you mentioned butt pain. I have pain every time I ride shotgun. If I'm driving, I don't have that pain in my butt and legs at all. And someone asked earlier, how do we know it's not an injury? Well, we look at symptom behavior as we're trying to rule in the brain. And symptoms that behave inconsistently, that are based on context, that change when we're thinking about them too much or when we're really stressed. A lot of my athletes have no pain when they run, but the pain comes on later, right? These symptom behaviors are signs that we're dealing with a brain and nervous system driven phenomenon and not a body damage problem. So symptoms can be triggered by riding shotgun. They can be triggered by foods. They can be triggered by mattresses or shoes. The brain can pair any two things together that it wants, and this makes it sneaky. But we've gotten really good at figuring out how to discern based on symptom behavior whether a person's dealing with pain driven by the brain or pain driven by a body problem. If you go on vacation and you feel fine, and then as you're flying home or when you get home, the pain comes back, that's not a structural problem most of the time. Thoughts on that, Deb?
Well, and I just think like this bit of awareness is amazing. When you drive, you don't feel pain because you're distracted. Your attention is somewhere else. When you're sitting and riding shotgun, and maybe you've had an experience where you're noticing pain, well, then you're just more predisposed to noticing that you're going to have pain. And then the sensation of sitting becomes really like fills up your entire view screen. Whereas when you're driving, you're looking and thinking about other things. And so that's it. That's the only difference that's happening. So when you're really aware of your butt, hips, and legs, and the brain is saying that that's pain, saying that that's dangerous. And so you can kind of take that other experience and use it as evidence for that your
Yeah.
body is fine.
And we have the last question here is, if I have constant pain, is it possible to be pain-free? We like when pain isn't constant because that inconsistency tells us something. But we've seen plenty of people that have pain that's all there all the time, no matter what they're doing. That actually is a similar version of these symptom behaviors that we're talking about, where if you have a structural problem, it doesn't make sense that the pain is constant when you're resting, right? It almost doesn't make sense in the opposite direction. That said, just based on that one symptom behavior, I'm not going to say that we can make that pain go away. I'll just say that we see it all the time. And yes, it's very possible. And yes, we'd love to talk with you and support you in getting an answer to that question, for sure. Was there one more question in the chat that Tara fielded? Or we're at the end of our hour, I guess. So we could talk about this all day, couldn't we, Deb? Deb and I could just.
All day, every day. But I think the challenging thing is that there's knowledge, but then what we really have to do is people have to have the experience in their own body. And so, but knowledge is a great place to start, right? This is the very first time that some people are hearing and learning about these things in the first place. And that's, part of why pain science, like neuroscience education, is a part of the LIN program. Because we have to even be able to think differently about what we're experiencing to be able to start to experience it differently.
I'm really glad you said that, Deb. It's one thing to tell people. It's one thing for us to tell you these 7 things, but it's a totally different thing for us to show you and for you to experience it. It's very powerful. And I think someone said just now in the chat, this is such a radical shift. And Deb and I are immersed in this all day long, so it doesn't feel that radical to us, but we definitely appreciate what a massive paradigm shift this is. And I tell people all the time, I realize that we're asking a lot, but it's only because we see how much it can create change in people's lives that we're talking about it. So thank you for being here.
Thank
So
you
grateful
so
you joined us.
much for being here. And thank you, Charlie.
Thank you, Deb. I appreciate you.
Yeah.
Your work.
Appreciate it.